Daniel Hayes stood in the doorway of his grandfather's workshop, surveying the chaos with the practiced eye of a man who had spent 23 years designing order from nothing. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through grimy windows, illuminating a scene that could only be described as organized madness. Tools hung from every available surface, their purposes as mysterious as their arrangement. Half-finished contraptions cluttered workbenches, their twisted metal and carved wood components suggesting projects that had been abandoned mid-thought. At 47, Daniel had built his reputation on precision. His architectural firm in downtown Chicago specialized in sleek glass towers that pierced the sky with mathematical certainty. Every angle calculated, every material chosen for maximum efficiency, every space designed to optimize human productivity. His buildings were monuments to modern living, sterile and beautiful in their functionality. This workshop was the antithesis of everything Daniel believed in. "What were you thinking, old man?" he muttered, stepping carefully over a collection of brass gears that had spilled across the floor. The workshop smelled of sawdust and machine oil, tinged with something else, something that reminded him of childhood visits he'd tried to forget. His grandfather, Thomas Hayes, had been the family's well-meaning eccentric. While Daniel's father built a successful accounting practice, Thomas had spent his days in this workshop, tinkering with inventions that never quite worked, dreaming of mechanical marvels that existed only in his imagination. Daniel remembered him as a kind man with calloused hands and eyes that lit up when he spoke of his projects, but ultimately, he'd been a dreamer in a world that rewarded pragmatism. Now Thomas was gone, and Daniel was left with the burden of liquidating his estate. The workshop and the small property it sat on were worth something, but not much. Daniel's plan was simple: hire an appraiser, catalog anything of value, sell what he could, and demolish the rest. Clean, efficient, final. He pulled out his phone to confirm the appointment. The appraiser would arrive tomorrow at 2 o'clock, giving Daniel exactly 18 hours to prepare. He'd already arranged for a dumpster to be delivered in the morning. As he began clearing a path through the workshop, Daniel's foot caught on something small and hard. He looked down to find an intricately carved wooden piece, no larger than his thumb, with edges that suggested it might be part of a puzzle. The craftsmanship was exquisite, tiny details etched into the wood with a precision that would have impressed even Daniel's demanding standards. He pocketed the piece and continued working, but within minutes, he found another, then another. Each piece was unique, carved from different types of wood, but all showed the same meticulous attention to detail. By the time he'd cleared the first workbench, Daniel had collected 7 pieces, their smooth surfaces warm to the touch despite the workshop's chill. More toys, he said to himself, but he couldn't bring himself to throw them away. There was something about the way they fit together in his palm, as if they were meant to be held, examined, understood. Near the main workbench, Daniel discovered a leather-bound journal lying open beneath a tarp. The pages were yellowed with age, but the ink was still clear. His grandfather's handwriting filled the margins around detailed technical drawings that looked like architectural blueprints, but for no building Daniel recognized. The sketches showed impossible geometries, mechanical systems that seemed to serve no practical purpose, and notes written in a mixture of technical jargon and what could only be described as poetry. "The alignment of shadows reveals the heart of the machine," read one note. "The song of the wood must harmonize with the dance of brass before the secret can breathe." Daniel shook his head. Even his grandfather's notes were fantastical nonsense. But as he studied the drawings more carefully, something nagged at him. The proportions weren't random. They followed mathematical principles he recognized from his own work. The angles were precise, the measurements consistent. This wasn't the random doodling of a dreamer. This was the work of someone who understood structural engineering. A knock at the workshop door interrupted his thoughts. Through the window, Daniel saw a woman in her 60s examining the brass gears scattered near the entrance. "Mr. Hayes," she called. "I'm Margaret Chen from Chen Antiques. I heard you might be selling some of your grandfather's collection." Daniel opened the door, surprised by her intensity. Her eyes swept the workshop with the hunger of a collector who'd found something rare. "I'm particularly interested in those brass components," she continued, gesturing toward the gears. Your grandfather had quite a reputation among certain circles. We've been watching for years, hoping he might decide to sell. Watching for what exactly? Margaret smiled mysteriously. Thomas Hayes was more than just a local inventor, Mr. Hayes. He was a master craftsman, a mechanical genius who understood principles most people never even consider. Those gears? They're not just decorative. They're part of something much larger. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. What kind of something? I'm not entirely sure, Margaret admitted. But I know they're worth far more than they appear. I'd be willing to offer you $15,000 for the complete set. $15,000. For a handful of old gears that Daniel had been ready to throw away. After Margaret left with promises to return tomorrow, Daniel found himself studying the brass components with new eyes. They were beautiful, certainly, but $15,000 beautiful? What did Margaret know that he didn't? As evening approached, Daniel realized he'd been in the workshop for over 6 hours without accomplishing his original goal. The place was still chaos, but now it was chaos that intrigued him. The wooden puzzle pieces seemed to multiply as he worked. By sunset, he'd collected nearly 30 of them, each one unique, each one clearly part of a larger design. The temperature in the workshop had been fluctuating all day, warming and cooling in patterns that seemed to follow no logical sequence. Daniel had checked the heating system twice, but found nothing wrong. The changes were subtle but persistent, as if the building itself was breathing. That night, Daniel dreamed of gears turning in perfect synchronization, of wooden puzzles that assembled themselves, of shadows that moved independently of their sources. He woke with the strange sensation that he'd been on the verge of understanding something important, something that had slipped away the moment consciousness returned. The next morning brought an unexpected complication. Daniel's phone rang at 7:30, the appraiser's voice apologetic but firm. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes. My mother's been rushed to the hospital. I need to reschedule for tomorrow afternoon. I know this is inconvenient." "No problem," Daniel heard himself saying, though he wasn't sure why. The delay should have frustrated him, but instead, he felt an odd sense of relief. Another day in the workshop. Another day to understand what his grandfather had been trying to accomplish. The morning brought rain, a steady downpour that drummed against the workshop's metal roof. Daniel arrived to find water dripping through a loose section near the back wall, threatening a collection of aged lumber his grandfather had apparently been saving for some future project. As he moved the heavy boards, Daniel noticed something odd. The wall behind them sounded hollow when he knocked on it. This section of the workshop was older than the rest, built from brick rather than the metal siding that enclosed the other walls. Daniel ran his hands along the surface, feeling for irregularities. About 4 feet from the floor, one brick felt different from the others. When he pressed it, it gave slightly, as if it were mounted on some kind of pivot. As he examined the loose brick more closely, Daniel accidentally brushed against its edge. For just a moment, he could have sworn he saw a flash of light from within the wall, not electrical, but something warmer, more organic. He pressed his face to the gap, trying to see inside, but the light was gone. Faulty wiring, he told himself, but the explanation felt hollow. The workshop's electrical system was ancient, but not dangerous. Thomas had been too careful for that. Daniel spent the rest of the day working with increasing intensity, driven by a restlessness he couldn't name. The wooden puzzle pieces seemed to call to him from their various hiding places throughout the workshop. He found them tucked behind tools, wedged into corners, even hanging from hooks, as if they'd been placed there deliberately. By evening, he had collected nearly 50 pieces, and their combined weight was beginning to reveal a pattern. The pieces weren't random. They were components of something larger, something that would create a three-dimensional image when properly assembled. Daniel spread them across his grandfather's main workbench, rotating and rearranging them under the workshop's harsh fluorescent lights. Slowly, sections began to connect. What had seemed like abstract shapes revealed themselves as parts of buildings, tiny architectural elements that fit together with clockwork precision. As Daniel worked, he found himself referring to his grandfather's journal more frequently. The cryptic notes began to make sense when viewed as instructions rather than poetry. The alignment of shadows wasn't mystical nonsense, It was a reference to the precise positioning of light sources. The song of the wood described the acoustic properties of different timber types. The dance of brass referred to the mechanical principles governing gear ratios and torque. His grandfather hadn't been a dreamer at all. He'd been an engineer disguising his precision as whimsy. The revelation changed everything. Daniel began to see the workshop not as chaos, but as an elaborate puzzle. Every seemingly random placement of tools and materials was actually part of a larger design. The brass gears weren't decorative, they were functional components waiting to be activated. The wooden pieces weren't toys, they were a key. By midnight, Daniel had assembled roughly half of the wooden puzzle. The emerging image showed a section of the mysterious blueprint from his grandfather's journal, but in three-dimensional form. It was a building, but unlike any building Daniel had ever seen. The architecture was functional but fantastical, with spiral towers that seemed to defy gravity and bridges that connected spaces in impossible ways. Daniel worked through the night, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain. The temperature fluctuations in the workshop had become more pronounced, and he began to notice that they corresponded to his progress with the puzzle. As each section clicked into place, the air grew warmer, as if the building itself was responding to his efforts. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place, just as the sun rose on the day of the rescheduled appraisal. Daniel stepped back from the workbench, exhausted but exhilarated. The completed puzzle formed a perfect replica of the blueprint from his grandfather's journal, a key that matched the hollow wall's dimensions exactly. With trembling hands, Daniel compared the wooden key to the journal's notes about shadow alignment. According to the text, the key needed to be positioned at a specific angle to catch the morning light filtering through the workshop's east-facing window. The shadows it cast would reveal the final mechanism. Daniel positioned the wooden key according to the journal's specifications, then searched for the other components mentioned in the notes. The brass gears, which he now understood, were precisely calibrated for this moment. The pocket watch he'd found in his grandfather's desk drawer, its hands stopped at exactly 7:42. The oddly shaped mirror that had seemed like another random antique. The appraisal was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Daniel had 6 hours to solve a puzzle his grandfather had spent decades preparing. He arranged the components according to the journal's cryptic instructions, feeling like an archaeologist reconstructing an ancient machine. The brass gears fit together with satisfying precision, their teeth meshing in patterns that created complex ratios of motion. The pocket watch, when wound and set to the correct time, provided a rhythmic heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with the entire mechanism. At exactly 7:42 a.m., Daniel positioned the mirror to catch the morning sunlight. The reflected beam struck the wooden key, casting intricate shadows on the hollow wall. The shadows weren't random. They formed a pattern that matched markings Daniel hadn't noticed before, tiny symbols etched into the brick at precise intervals. Following the journal's final instruction, Daniel pressed the loose brick while simultaneously winding the pocket watch. The effect was immediate and breathtaking. The wall didn't simply open, it transformed. Bricks pivoted on hidden hinges, revealing a mechanism of incredible complexity. Gears turned within gears, powered by weights and springs that had been waiting decades for activation. The sound was like a symphony of precision, each component adding its voice to a mechanical chorus that spoke of genius and patience and love. And then, as the wall completed its transformation, Daniel saw what his grandfather had been building all along. Inside the hollow space, perfectly preserved and fully functional, was a miniature city. Not a model or a toy, but a living, breathing mechanical metropolis. Tiny lights flickered in windows no larger than Daniel's fingernail. Miniature vehicles moved through streets narrow as pencil lead. Steam rose from chimney stacks that could have been threaded with dental floss. The entire city hummed with life, powered by the clockwork mechanism his grandfather had hidden within the workshop's walls. Daniel sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was witnessing. This wasn't just an invention, it was a vision of the future, a perfect society operating in mechanical harmony. Every building in the miniature city was a masterpiece of engineering, designed to maximize both efficiency and beauty. The transportation system was elegant and sustainable. The integration of residential, commercial, and recreational spaces created a community that seemed to pulse with possibility. A hidden compartment near the base of the city contained a final journal entry, written in his grandfather's careful script. My dear Daniel, if you are reading this, then you have inherited more than just my workshop. You have inherited my dreams, my hopes for a better world, and most importantly, my faith in your ability to bring those dreams to life. I know you see me as a failure, a dreamer who never accomplished anything practical. But everything I built was practical, Daniel. It was just practical on a scale the world wasn't ready to understand. This city, my city, represents principles of design and community that could revolutionize how we live. It is sustainable, beautiful, and human in ways our current cities are not. I designed this workshop as a test, Daniel. Not of your intelligence. I always knew you were brilliant, but of your willingness to see beyond the obvious, to value the impossible, to trust in the power of imagination. The junk you wanted to throw away was actually the most sophisticated mechanical system I ever created. Every component served a purpose. Every seemingly random placement was part of a larger design. You are the architect I always hoped you would become. Now I challenge you to become the architect the world needs. Take what you have learned here, study my city, understand its principles, and then build it, not in miniature, but in the real world, where people can live and work and dream in harmony. The workshop is yours now, Daniel. Not as a burden, but as a laboratory. Not as a reminder of my failures, but as a foundation for your success. The city is the blueprint. You are the builder. Make it real. With love and infinite faith in your potential, your grandfather, Thomas Hayes. Daniel read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Each reading revealed new layers of meaning, new depths of love and sacrifice. His grandfather hadn't been a failure. He'd been a visionary who had disguised his genius as eccentricity, who had created a test that would challenge everything Daniel thought he knew about architecture, about dreams, about the relationship between the practical and the impossible. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted his thoughts. Through the window, Daniel saw the appraiser climbing out of a sedan, briefcase in hand. For a moment, panic seized him. How could he explain what he discovered? How could he make anyone understand the magnitude of his grandfather's achievement? But as the appraiser approached the workshop door, Daniel realized he didn't need to explain anything. The mechanical city was its own explanation. The precision of its engineering, the beauty of its design, the revolutionary nature of its urban planning, these things would speak for themselves. Daniel opened the door with a smile that felt strange on his face, as if he were remembering how to express joy after years of practiced seriousness. Mr. Hayes? The appraiser asked. I'm sorry about the delay. Family emergency. No problem at all, Daniel replied and meant it. Actually, the delay was perfect. I had some additional research to do. As the appraiser entered the workshop, his eyes widened at the sight of the mechanical city. The tiny lights flickered in welcome, the miniature vehicles continued their precise journeys, and the entire metropolis hummed with life and possibility. My God, the appraiser whispered. What is this? It's a blueprint, Daniel said, his voice filled with newfound certainty. A blueprint for the future. Within hours, word of the discovery had spread. Engineers and architects, urban planners and mechanical experts, historians and visionaries, they all came to see Thomas Hayes' masterpiece. The workshop that Daniel had planned to demolish became a pilgrimage site for anyone who believed in the power of imagination to change the world. Margaret Chin returned, no longer interested in purchasing the brass gears. I knew your grandfather was special, she said, her eyes fixed on the mechanical city. But I never imagined anything like this. Daniel spent the following weeks documenting every aspect of his grandfather's work. He photographed each building in the miniature city, studied the engineering principles that made it function, and began to understand the revolutionary urban planning concepts it represented. The city wasn't just beautiful, it was a solution to problems that plagued modern urban environments. Its transportation system eliminated traffic congestion. Its integration of green spaces and residential areas created communities that fostered human connection. Its sustainable energy systems provided clean power without sacrificing efficiency. As Daniel studied his grandfather's work, his own architectural practice underwent a transformation. The sterile glass towers that had made his reputation began to seem hollow and soulless. He found himself designing buildings that prioritized human comfort over maximum profit, community spaces over efficient land use, beauty over pure functionality. His first project, inspired by his grandfather's vision, was a mixed-use development in downtown Chicago. Instead of another glass tower, Daniel created a complex that spiraled upward like a mechanical flower, its apartments and offices connected by bridges that seemed to dance through the air. The building integrated sustainable technologies with classical proportions, creating a structure that was both cutting-edge and timeless. The building was a sensation, featured on magazine covers and studied in architecture schools. But for Daniel, its greatest achievement was the way it made people feel. Residents spoke of the building as a community rather than just a place to live. Workers described their offices as inspiring rather than just functional. Children played in the integrated parks with laughter that echoed through the spiral corridors. 1 year after discovering his grandfather's secret, Daniel stood in the workshop that had become his second office. The mechanical city continued to operate with perfect precision, its tiny lights a constant reminder of the dreams that had inspired it. The workshop itself had been transformed into a research facility, where Daniel and a team of engineers and designers worked to translate his grandfather's miniature vision into full-scale reality. The rigid, cynical architect who had entered the workshop to liquidate an estate no longer existed. In his place stood a man who understood that the most practical thing in the world was an impossible dream pursued with precision and love. Daniel pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant's number. "Sarah, I need you to clear my schedule for next week. I'm starting preliminary sketches for the Hayes Community Center." "Another project inspired by your grandfather's work?" Sarah asked. She'd become accustomed to Daniel's new approach to architecture, his insistence on creating buildings that served both practical and spiritual needs. "The most important one yet," Daniel replied, his eyes fixed on the mechanical city. "It's going to be a place where people can come to dream, to learn, to build things that seem impossible. A place where the next generation can discover that there's no such thing as just a dreamer." As he spoke, Daniel noticed something new in the mechanical city. A tiny figure had appeared in one of the miniature parks, so small it was barely visible. The figure was seated on a bench, and though Daniel couldn't make out any details, he had the distinct impression that it was an old man with calloused hands and eyes that lit up when he spoke of his projects. Daniel smiled, understanding that some dreams were too powerful to be contained by the limitations of the physical world. His grandfather's vision lived on, not just in the mechanical city, but in every building Daniel designed, every community he helped create, every impossible dream he chose to pursue with precision and love. The workshop fell silent except for the gentle humming of the mechanical city. In that silence, Daniel could hear the song of the wood, the dance of brass, and the alignment of shadows that revealed the heart of the machine. He could hear his grandfather's voice, no longer the disappointed ramblings of a failed dreamer, but the clear instructions of a master craftsman who had built not just a city, but a legacy. The architect's hidden blueprint had finally found its builder.